Here I have a bit of code that I want to talk about how you would go about debugging this. So I have a map container set up, and here I am doing insertion into the container, so there's no problem there. I put in these key value pairs. Now, what's going to happen here is I'm going to try to access this container, and instead of using the square bracket notation, which does no bounds checking to see whether the key is valid, I'm actually using the at method. And the nice thing about the at method is that it will actually check to see whether the key is valid, and if it's not, it will actually generate an exception and provide you some feedback about that. Now let's look what happens when I go and compile this code. So I use the -G option and I compile my code. Go ahead and run my code. I get this message, terminate called, after throwing an instance of out of range. So the nice thing is that the use of the at method did check to see whether this key is valid, rather than kind of silently failing and potentially just grabbing something randomly out of memory. The problem is I don't know where this happened. It doesn't tell me what line of code, etc. So this might be an opportunity to use the debugger to help figure out what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and start DDD and provide the name of the executable. Now we have our code open in the debugger, and I can go ahead and press the run button, and I'll get this little message. And what I see is basically it ran through the code and it's generating the same message. So this doesn't seem like it's terribly helpful because it isn't really narrowing down where the problem is or why did this happen. So the potential way of getting additional information about what's happening and why is down here. I can use the command line interface and I can type backtrace. And this basically requests the equivalent of a Python traceback. So it provides the full history of where I am in my code, what functions I've been calling, etc. And in particular, if I look at the last line of code, it will say backtrace.cpp line 12. And this is a very useful piece of information because it's telling me exactly what line of code this happened on. So you just need to kind of work your way through here and remember that it's typically always going to be this last line of code here in the backtrace or the trace back. So now what I can do is, since I'm already here typing commands anyway, is I can go ahead and set a breakpoint, and I can specify the breakpoint by specifying the name of the file, :12. So I basically just replicate that information from the traceback. I press enter, and now you'll notice the little stop sign has appeared on this line of code. And because this is a simple little example, we already knew that that's where the problem was, but it's kind of reassuring to see that that is actually where the breakpoint shows up. Now I can go ahead and rerun my code and notice that it has stopped right before it's executing this problematic line of code. Now what I can do is notice that I'm using the at method here, and I'm using variable n as the key that I'm trying to access out of the dictionary. So I can hover over n, observe that n is equal to 2, and then I can use that information to figure out why is that an invalid key and make the appropriate changes to my code to fix the problem.